Welcome back to the MBC Sports Podcast. Andrew Selliver, Connell Scruggs, JP Eisenhower, and Andrew Feeney here with you on Black Friday to talk a little high school football and a little college football. It's playoff time in the state of Georgia. Marist getting ready to take on Central out of Carrollton, Georgia tomorrow on Saturday at 5:30. A little unusual timing there as the GHSA had to push all 2A and all 4A state first round playoff games to Saturday due to a lack of officials. That's mostly in result of it being the first round on Thanksgiving week. Typically, it's the quarterfinals on Thanksgiving week, so you have a quarter of the amount of games that you would have this year. So just a lack of officials pushed 16 games in 4A and 16 games in 2A to Saturday. Marist 5:30 at Hughes Spalding Stadium against Central Carrollton. Let's talk first about the game against Mays last week. Marist ends up winning that one 52-20, I believe. But interesting there is Marist actually gives up 20 points after allowing 6 points in 7 games. They give up 20 points against Mays. Most of those all of them coming in the second half. But I think we did see a little weakness out of the Marist defense.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it at the end of the second quarter, when Mays was driving down the field, they were able to move the ball by dinking and dunking it and getting yards after the catch, but all those points really came in when the starters weren't playing, so it's really not something that you need to worry about that much, in my opinion.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I think it was just that one drive.
Right. And it's when they changed the quarterback and started to throw the ball a little bit more, and I think that's just a little bit concerning, but not that much. It's just the type of passes that Mays was running. It's those quick slants and those timing curl routes, those little hitch routes. They're so hard to defend as a zone defense because all you have to do is just find the soft spot, and if the ball comes in on time, it's virtually impossible to stop those kind of throws. So, and I think just the way that Marist has defended the run all year, I think if you have a solid run defense, you can start from there and just build up. So basically, the pass defense will come because we haven't really faced a pass offense all year. So how can you prepare for a team like that? We haven't seen one, and I think throughout the playoffs, we have the potential to see some more passing offenses, which is going to be interesting.
yeah, and I think with a lot of those passes, it really just comes down to the linebackers just getting a little bit more experience playing those types of passes. A lot of those short to intermediate passes in zone coverage are the responsibility of those linebackers, and Mayer certainly has some very talented linebackers to be able to play very well, very good in coverage. And I think it's really just going to come down to them executing the plays on defense.
Well, and I think there's so much experience on the defensive side of the ball for the War Eagles. Almost all of those guys, multiple years of experience playing on that side of the football. I think the only real players that are playing their first year would be Wright Formasano at defensive back, and then the 2 defensive tackles that are rotating in. But certainly a lot of experience. I would think you'll see some adjustments there. But I think we definitely saw a slight weakness, and that's always been the way to beat Marist. And Oconee County last year executed that game plan to perfection. But still, that defense is one of the best in the whole state, all classifications. So to beat Marist, you're not going to be able to give up more than 14 or 17 points because I just don't see anybody, even explosive offenses like Carver Columbus or Jefferson, putting up more than 20 points against the Marist defense.
Right, and I think you saw it just like you were saying in the Oconee County game last year, only giving up 7 points to Marist, I believe, and they were able to win that ball game because Marist, I think, gave up less than 17 points in that game, but they were still able to pull out the win.
Yeah, it was 17-7
Right.
to Oconee County. So, I mean, that was just a defensive battle, and that's how you have to beat Marist. Marist has that good defense. You're going to have to play good defense, stop Marist offense if you want a chance. I'm not sure Central Carrollton will be able to do that this week. Central, a team that has a very good rushing offense, and that bodes well for them in some games, but not this week. You feel like going up against the Marist team that really just, I'm not sure Marist has given up over 100 yards rushing in any game this year. And against rushing, I guess you could say against rushing offenses, they've only given up 6 points because Mays was a passing offense. Central led by Nerado Levet. We don't have stats on their two most recent games against Cedartown and Ridgeland, but he had over 1,600 rushing yards through 7 games on the season. That's unbelievable numbers, up around 230 rushing yards a game. But he is a lot of their offense, and you think that'll be a concern coming in against Marist is will they be able to run the ball?
Yeah, and when you look at the only really fully rushing team we've played this year is Holy Innocents, which is a triple option team. They're, I think, the only team that broke 100 yards. They had 107 yards as a triple option team on against Marist. When you run the triple option, you can only get 107 yards rushing in the whole game. That says something about your run defense.
Yeah, certainly. And Marist has played against so many rushing teams through the years that they just get so much experience, and that those linebackers and the front four for the War Eagles are so good, and it ultimately comes down to athleticism. You can have big guys up on the line, and you're still not going to dominate Marist because they're so speedy off the ball.
Exactly, and I think the game that stands out for me at that point is Stevenson. Stevenson, definitely the biggest, most physical team we've played all season. We thought it could be kind of the biggest test for Marist defense coming up. How would they match up physically against that Stevenson offensive line and running backs? And it just showed that exact point that you said. Marist, when they compete physically with the other team, they can also compete speed wise. They can get around the edges. They just totally outran and were able to just beat the tackles to the outside and get in the backfield almost every single play. You could see the Stevenson tackles and offensive line couldn't compete with the speed of Marist, so it's almost that double-edged sword. You got the physicality and you got the speed. It's hard to deal with both of those things in the front seven for Marist.
Yeah, and you look at Central Carrollton's passing offense, Bo Ivey, their quarterback. He's 48 for 95 on the year. That's just over 50% completion. 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That's got to be a huge concern. Only less than 700 yards passing for their quarterback on the year. And eventually they're going to have to turn to that. That's what we saw in a lot of these games again for Marist is these teams have to turn to the passing game, and that's something that they just haven't had a ton of experience with, and it ends up just turning into turnovers and sloppy play.
Yeah, and I think another thing for Marist is Marist really hasn't played a full game yet. They've had their starters pulled out at halftime or pulled out in the third quarter, I believe, for the Woodward game. They really haven't played a complete game yet, so you wonder just having to play out a full game how the players are going to react to that.
Yeah, and going off of that, it's like obviously Champ is a starting quarterback currently, and JP thinks it's a clear choice, but I don't know. I really don't think that there's one quarterback that's significantly better than the other. And like you're saying, JP, we haven't played a full game yet. I'm curious to see if when we are in a close game, if they have to switch back to Hayden or they stick with Champ. Like it's interesting to me like how there isn't one distinct starter at quarterback.
Yeah, one thing to look out for though in this football game, you'll likely see a lot of 3 and outs, not much moving to the football for Central if they keep it on the ground. Even though Nerado Levet has been so explosive this year, they do have a very good punter in Corbin Waldrop. He's a 4.5-star punter as a senior. He's averaging almost 44 yards per punt this season. He could play a huge difference for them if they want to stay in this football game and switching the field, staying in that field position battle, because that could be a big difference in this football game. We're going to now take a look at just a couple games this week. Just one pick on the week. North Gwinnett and Cherokee, an interesting one up in 7A. North Gwinnett has had a very interesting season this year, up and down. They have some very talented players up there. Barrett Carter, one to mention, the linebacker committed to Clemson. And defensively, they've been very good this year, but they've just lost some games that you wouldn't expect them to lose. They beat McEachern to start the year. Jones County. They started out 3-0 with a big 21-0 win over Parkview, but then they lose to Lovejoy and Archer, games you wouldn't expect them to lose. They've bounced back nicely though. They've won their last. They lost to Collins Hill to lose the region title, but they won all of their last games, 4 out of their last 5, and a big one here against Cherokee. Cherokee, a team that competed in that region with Milton and Roswell. They lost a close one to Roswell, ends up costing them the 2 seed, and then Milton takes that region. But in a week that in high school doesn't have too many big-time matchups, this one could be the one to look out for. Because a lot of games are just going to be blowouts in the first round when you have 1 versus 4 seeds. But this one is one to keep your eye on. I'm going to actually take Cherokee in this football game. I think North Gwinnett's just been too up and down.
I agree with you there, Andrew. I'm going to go with Cherokee here. I agree exactly with what you said. North Gwinnett, it's kind of like, what offense are you going to see out of North Gwinnett in this game? Are you going to see the offense that struggled all year, or are you going to see the offense that puts things together for a game and scores a lot of points? So they've done both of those all season, and that defense has been pretty solid all year. But against Collins Hill, you saw they gave up 41 points to a team that could actually throw the ball. And Cherokee, they've beaten Cartersville, which is a big win for them. And I think, but they did have that loss to Roswell. But that in mind, I still think I'm going to go with Cherokee. They've been more consistent all year.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I'm going with Cherokee, and that's because, like you said, against Collins Hill, I was high on Cherokee. I really thought I really thought that. I mean, I was high on North Gwinnett. I really thought that their defense was legit, but then they just got lit up by a team that can pass the ball, and Cherokee can pass the ball. So I think that Cherokee's going to win this one.
You know, every time I pick North Gwinnett, they lose, and every time I pick against them, they win. So I'm going to pick Cherokee, and because I picked Cherokee, North Gwinnett will probably win this game. But it's just how the season's been for North Gwinnett. They've been so up and down, but I just can't go with them in this game, so I'm going to pick Cherokee.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. We all take the upset with the 3 seed in that one, and Cherokee over North Gwinnett. That'll be one to watch. Another couple of games to keep your eye on this week. Troop Benedictine in Class 4A. I think that is the game to watch if you're taking a look at the Class 4A bracket. We talked a little bit about it in bracketology, but Troop County coming off an almost crazy win against Carver Columbus, a team we thought wasn't going to be tested all season. They were up 29-12, end up losing 29-14, end up losing that game 32-29. Could have taken the 1 seed out of that region with that win. End up at the 4 spot after a 3-way tie for second and some tiebreakers. And then Benedictine, a team that's coming in, winning that region despite not playing any region games. That's a crazy story. Just COVID stuff that happened down there on the coast. But that's a team that can throw the ball around. That'll be one to watch. Certainly could see an upset there. But I think that's one to watch in 4A. Keep your eye on Colquitt County versus Brookwood. Brookwood, a team up in 7A as a 4 seed, taking on Colquitt. Colquitt, I think definitely the number 2 ranked team in 7A, up there with Grayson. But Brookwood had a good season until Dylan Lonergan and Morissette, their wide receiver, went down injured. If they're back, they could compete in that one. And then in 3A, Oconee County and Westminster going at it in another 1 versus 4 matchup. Oconee County ranked number 2 behind Cedar Grove in 3A, but Westminster competed with Cedar Grove their last time out, 24-10. They actually led that game at halftime. So some interesting matchups to watch there. Not too many good games in the state of Georgia on opening weekend, but those are a couple to keep your eye on as we move into college football. Not too many games once again on the docket this week. Big week in the Big Ten last week. We'll talk about that in a minute maybe, but we'll go straight into upset picks. Not too many games to pick this week. But 2 big games today in Texas and Iowa State happening right now, and North Carolina, Notre Dame coming up. We'll take our upset picks first, though. Connell, who do you have in an upset this week?
I have Nebraska over Iowa. This is one of those Big Ten upset picks here. I just think the Big Ten's kind of all over the place this year. Anyone can beat anyone on any given Sunday, or Saturday, rather. This is college football. So I don't know. I think Nebraska's got a chance this week against Iowa.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with. Go ahead, Feeney.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna go with a good old Iron Bowl upset. You never really know. That game doesn't matter who the real better team is, and I know Connell doesn't really like that. I think Bama is the significantly better team this year. I think they've proven that. But there's bad blood in between these teams. We all know that, and I think Auburn's gonna come ready to play tomorrow.
I've said this since the beginning. I really just want to see Alabama beat Auburn on a game-winning kick because I think that'd be the most ironic thing ever. But for my upset pick, I'm going to pick Rutgers over Purdue. I don't think Rutgers' record shows the improvements that they've made this year. I think Rutgers is really a team that's made a huge step forward from last year, especially you see in their first game on defense. They made huge improvements in the turnover column. And I think Purdue, coming off a huge loss where they really feel like they were robbed. They had the offensive pass interference, and then the very next play, they threw an interception and lost to Minnesota. And coming off a heartbreaking loss like that, you could either respond in a great way or you could respond in a horrible way. And with a team like Purdue that's just coming off and just starting to get into some winning ways, coming off 2 straight losses, I think they might fall down to Rutgers this week.
Yeah, I was gonna go Colorado over USC. I think we've had USC in an upset pick the past. I think all of their 3 games so far. Only problem, that game has now been canceled or postponed due to USC COVID issues. USC ranked in 2-0, but I think they've looked very unimpressive so far through 2 games. I thought they were going to finally lose one this week, but that one canceled, so I moved to Texas Tech over Oklahoma State. You take a look at Oklahoma State's past 3 games. They lost to Texas in overtime. They beat Kansas State 20-18, and then they just got absolutely annihilated in prime time in Bedlam against Oklahoma last week. Talk about a team that's really turning it on late. Oklahoma Sooners look very good right now. Unfortunately, 2 early losses kind of eliminated them and their playoff chances, but I think Oklahoma State's kind of slipping down a slope in the Big 12. I think they take another fall this week to a Texas Tech team that isn't great, but they've played spoiler already this year. I think they get a massive win for the program over Oklahoma State. And let's talk first off Notre Dame. Are they on upset alert this week? North Carolina, Notre Dame, maybe one of the biggest games other than Clemson on that Notre Dame schedule. Fina, we'll start with you, the big Irish fan. Do you think you should be concerned this Friday?
I mean, when you look at it, Notre Dame's on upset alert. Ever since they beat Clemson, they're on upset alert every week, and I think that there's a clear skill gap in between these 2 teams in UNC and Notre Dame. UNC has little to no defense at all, and Notre Dame just should run the ball down their throat. Should. So I obviously I'm a Notre Dame fan. It's hard for me to see UNC winning this one, but God, I really hope that they're not on upset alert.
Look, my opinion on this is the lack of respect for Notre Dame shown after that Clemson one is actually kind of crazy because I don't know, the way they played that Clemson game, I think it was less of Clemson. It was I don't know, it was just less of Clemson's offense due to the loss of Trevor Lawrence and more of how Notre Dame handled Clemson's defense in that game, and they just haven't been shown any respect after that. I don't think they're on upset alert here. North Carolina should have lost to Wake Forest. Somehow they came back in that game, gave up 53 to that team, lost to Virginia, and lost to Florida State, all of which they've given up over 30 points in each of those losses. So defense has been an issue for UNC. Also, it kind of depends on what Sam Howell you're going to get. He's been so inconsistent. When he's great, he's great. When he's not great, he's not great, pretty much. He's all over the place, kind of. But they do have a talented running back, so we'll see what they can do against Notre Dame, but I don't think they're on upset alert.
You have a UNC team that survives off of beating teams by scores of 68-72. You have to be in the 60s and 70s to beat any team. That is not the game you're going to get out of Notre Dame. You're not going to get into that super high scoring game. Wake Forest, a team that does not pass the ball, went air raid on UNC's defense. I don't think Sam Howell, who has been inconsistent all season, is going to have his best day against Notre Dame's defense, which I think right now is the best defense in college football. I think Notre Dame's defense can do enough to slow down the tandem of backs that UNC has, and if Sam Howell is forced to throw the ball, I don't think he can make enough plays in this game, and I don't have any confidence in UNC's defense. And honestly, right now, when you look at the wins and the losses between Notre Dame and Alabama, I think Notre Dame should be ranked number 1. I don't think maybe at the end of the season that's not the case. Maybe at the end of the season Alabama should be ranked number 1. But I think right now, I know you guys don't agree with me, but I think Notre Dame deserves the number 1 spot right now. I think Alabama probably will get it at the end of the season for me, but I think right now Notre Dame's the number 1 team.
I think I'll take 2 exceptions with what you said. I agree that Notre Dame likely wins this one and covers. I think we would all take the cover in this one, just 5.5. I think they could. I think they not shut down North Carolina, but I think North Carolina puts up 35 maybe max, and that's not enough for them to win this.
The spread is only 5.5.
Yeah,
Okay, that's just disrespectful. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. 5.5.
I think North Carolina maybe gets to 31-35 in this game, but they're going to give up 50, so it doesn't matter. And you look at who Notre Dame plays, though, JP. Their big win is that Clemson win, 47-40 in overtime. But who else have they really played? Come on, nobody that's ranked.
I like
nobody.
Clemson.
Hold on, nobody that's ranked. They get UNC, who's number 25 today,
19.
and they win by 7 and
19 in the playoff.
They win by 7 against Clemson in overtime. You look at Alabama; they beat Georgia by almost
That Georgia
20.
win does not look as good anymore.
They're ranked, JP.
You have a
they
benched
beat Georgia
quarterback.
by 20. They beat Texas A&M
You have a
by
benched
like
quarterback
35.
and a team that got blown out is getting blown out by ranked teams that they're playing.
They beat Texas A&M by 35. They played.
The
played
Texas
more
A&M
than
win,
one
that is their
ranked
one.
team.
That is their good win. That's what I'm saying. But if you're looking at their 2 marquee wins and you look at Clemson or
their
Texas
2 marquee
A&M,
wins are blowouts, whereas Notre Dame's is in overtime.
Yeah.
I know it's Clemson, but
I don't
Texas
know.
A&M by 35. JP.
At the end of the
Come on.
season,
Notre
look,
Dame-
at the end of the season, I
JP.
still think Alabama will probably be the number 1 team for me. But I think right now, I still think Notre Dame is the number 1 team for me. I think I've
JP,
seen
if-
more from Notre Dame.
Come on now, JP.
If both teams win out, then
If both
win
teams
the
win out,
ACC
I would
championship,
have Alabama at number 1.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
If Alabama loses,
Because if
one
Alabama
game-
beats Florida, I think that's what the difference is for me.
Yeah, exactly.
But Notre Dame will be Clemson
Yeah.
again. So
Yeah,
I
that
think
makes
the
more
No,
logic
that's
sense,
the thing.
JP.
I think
Logic
Notre Dame would
is-
split. I think Notre Dame
If
splits with
logic
Clemson
is
is
way
most
off
likely.
there, JP.
If,
Yeah.
No,
if,
I think
he's-
most likely Notre Dame would split with Clemson. This is what I
if
think is
Bama
gonna happen.
somehow loses to Florida,
But JP, hold on.
if Notre Dame-
if Bama beats Florida and Notre Dame beats Clemson again,
If that
who do you
happens,
have
I
at
think
number
Notre Dame
1?
should be number 1. If Notre Dame can sweep Clemson, I think Notre Dame should be number 1.
with T-Law, maybe.
If
maybe
Clemson
there's a
has Trevor
conversation.
Lawrence,
If
Notre Dame-
it's tough for me.
Clemson
JP,
has
but think of the
Trevor
committee.
Lawrence, Notre Dame
Not gonna
can
happen,
sweep
JP.
Think of the
Clemson.
committee. How are they thinking of this?
Who do they
If
respect more
A
right
team
now?
that sweeps
If Notre Dame
Clemson.
beats Clemson again, which a team they've already beat once, and Alabama beats a new team that they haven't beat yet that's ranked currently number 6, how could
still
they
like,
then
if you
jump
can sweep
Notre Dame over
Clemson,
Clemson?
if
Or Notre Dame
can
over
sweep
Alabama? I don't think
Clemson,
it's going to happen. I don't think that's logical.
No, I don't think it's going to happen. But I say, personally for me, if Notre Dame can sweep Clemson, I think they deserve that number 1
For
spot.
Notre Dame, the only path to number 1 is for Alabama to lose, and for them and then for Notre Dame to win out. That is it. That's it.
I think that's the only
Well,
path for them. But I think for me
I don't think it
personally, I
matters,
think Notre
but-
Dame's the number 1 team
It
if they were to
doesn't.
sweep.
I don't think it does either, Connell.
If they sweep,
And
I think,
Real quick, I'm going to go back to JP's original statement, and then we'll keep going on the playoff scenarios. But you said that Notre Dame has the best defense. I'm going to stop you right there. Northwestern has the best defense
Well,
in the
actually,
country.
yeah, I
We
gotta
can-
say,
we
no,
can
I'm
go
gonna
with that.
backtrack on that. I'm gonna go with
Uh,
Northwestern.
We can go Notre Dame second, but that was unreal
Yeah, no,
performance
I'm
by
gonna
Northwestern last week.
backtrack on that one too. I forgot about
They gave up
Northwestern's
7
defense.
to a Wisconsin team that put up like 48 against Michigan the week before.
Yeah, no, I completely forgot about Northwestern. Northwestern's been
They
flying under the
control their own
radar.
destiny.
They
control their own destiny.
They do.
Because if they beat Ohio State, they went out and they beat Ohio State, they're in my mind. Let's talk about playoff scenarios here. Just run through all these teams. Notre Dame, I think we already kind of covered. If they win out, they're obviously in number 1 or number 2. Same with Alabama, I think there. But the interesting thing comes in if one of those teams loses their conference championship, then who gets in? So I think if Florida beats Alabama in the conference championship, Florida's in, and then Alabama drops. If Clemson beats Notre Dame, Clemson's in, Notre Dame drops. Oh, I think Big Ten winner should be undefeated theoretically. Ohio State or Northwestern. I think that team's in no matter what. And I think the one-loss Big Ten team's basically out. What do y'all see there? I think if Ohio State and Northwestern meet in the championship there, both undefeated, I see them get the loser out because they just haven't played anybody up in the Big Ten, and Big Ten's very weak this year.
No question. I think the loser of that game is not even that might drop out of the top 10. I mean, when you look at just the schedule they've had this year, it's going to be like, especially when you look at the Pac-12 also. I mean, the top Pac-12 team right now is Oregon, ranked 15th. And you see what the committee did to BYU, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They're ranked 14th. So the Pac-12 is not, I don't think that any Pac-12 has a chance this year just because of their shortened schedule and just how the entire Pac-12 looks. But I think with the Big Ten especially, I don't think a one-loss team even gets in the top 10 in the final rankings.
Well, here's my thought about going back to what you said about Notre Dame losing their conference championship. I think if Alabama wins their conference championship, wins out, Ohio State wins out, and Notre Dame loses to Clemson in the ACC championship, I still think Notre Dame is in.
Yeah, I think
sure.
That's the top four. I don't think there's any doubt.
Unless Andrew disagrees there, I think that in that case, the ranking has to be 1 Alabama, probably 2 Clemson, 3 Ohio State, 4 Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you.
I think at that point, they might end up putting undefeated Northwestern or Ohio State at 2, but it doesn't really matter because 2 versus 3, they're playing each other still.
Exactly.
In that situation, it'd be either Texas A&M.
But I think, you lock in Alabama at 1. My concern goes to, is there a possibility Notre Dame doesn't make it? And I think the answer is yes. It's
really?
Just a question of how much.
Yeah.
How much the what. I don't even know what's going on in the Pac-12 right now. Pac-12 is absolutely a mess right now. I'm just not sure they're going to get enough games in based on how many cancellations they've had to get a team in. I think it has to be Oregon because SC has looked so bad in their first 2 wins that even if they go undefeated, eye test tells you no chance.
And you know what's something this week for Oregon going against Oregon State? Oregon State's looked a lot better, so I don't even know if they get out of this week.
Well, I just don't know. Oregon just doesn't play anybody great out there.
And they're too young.
They'll end up probably playing SC in the championship, but if they go undefeated with wins over nobody, I mean, they have a win over who? Stanford, Washington State, UCLA, Washington, Cal, Oregon State. What a schedule against no-ranked teams.
Yeah.
And then they play SC and win that game. I just don't see that team getting in over a Notre Dame team that splits with Clemson. I think the concern goes to Power 5.
Notre Dame would have to get... Yeah, Connell, go ahead.
Well, and think about this. We're talking about Oregon beating a bunch of teams going undefeated against no opponents. What makes you think that they would rank Oregon over Cincinnati, a team that probably will go undefeated against? Like, in that case, if Oregon gets in undefeated against a bunch of no-name teams, then how do you justify keeping Cincinnati? And I think that would be a problem there for the committee. Well,
that's what I was getting to is Power 5. I think Pac-12 is almost a foregone conclusion that they're out of the picture. Even if we saw Alabama lose to Florida, Clemson beat Notre Dame, chaos ensues there. But I still think Pac-12 out of the picture. The question becomes Power 5. The question becomes, clearly they think Cincinnati is 7 spots in the rankings above BYU right now. And I don't know how that changes. The only thing that could change that is if BYU schedules something in their upcoming open weeks. They're not playing this week. They only have San Diego State left on the schedule, and clearly that game won't help them, even if they beat San Diego State by 50, which they've done to literally everybody. Apparently the Boise game, beating Boise State, who was ranked at the time by 40, doesn't matter either. I think they have to try right now to schedule somebody good, and if you end up losing that game, so be it. You can. I mean, you can deal with that later, but you want to try and give yourself the best chance to make the college football playoff. I think trying to schedule, I think Cincinnati in an open week is a possibility. Cincinnati doesn't play uh, until the 12th either, so they theoretically could schedule each other for the 5th. I think that's maybe the best case scenario for those teams is scheduling each other. Then you put all your marbles on one Power 5 team, the winner of that game trying to get in.
Yeah, and that's why they won't schedule each other, because it would literally just be it would be like whoever wins that game is the Power 5 guy, and I don't think that's a smart move by who yeah, I just don't think that's a smart move by either of the teams. I think that they're just gonna win out, or at least attempt to win out, and that's gonna be their best chance. That's what they're hoping for.
I think it's a smart
Well, the
move
problem is if they wanted to try and schedule a good team, the ACC
I think
and the SEC have those rules against it.
I think it's only a smart move for BYU because at this point Cincinnati is clearly above BYU as far as the committee is concerned. So the only team that has anything to gain from that game would be BYU if they were to beat Cincinnati in that game. But I feel like if BYU loses that game, I don't know how far they would even drop. And I feel like
Unless
we have to be very clear in this. I don't think a team outside. I feel like a Cincinnati, a UCF, a BYU, they aren't going to make the playoffs. The sky has to fall for them to make the playoffs. A UCF from years ago, they're not making the playoffs. There was never going to be a chance. I feel like there really isn't as much of a chance no matter how much we talk about it. Because I feel like so much has to happen for one of these teams to make the playoffs that it's just not possible at this point.
Well, here's why I think that BYU Cincinnati game's profitable for both teams. Cincinnati looks at the rankings right now. They're behind Texas A&M. Now, what changes in the next couple of weeks that makes them go above Texas A&M unless they scheduled a better team? I think they would have to. I think maybe beating BYU by a good margin puts them over the top of Texas A&M and maybe into the playoff conversation. But unless you're ahead of Texas A&M, you're not in the playoff conversation because I don't think Texas A&M's really has a chance here.
I think
Unfortunately, I'm going back to what JP said, Andrew. It's just there's no reason if unless BYU slowly moves their way up in the college football playoff rankings the next couple of weeks, then Cincinnati's not going to schedule it because right now BYU is not a threat whatsoever. They're 7 spots behind. There's no reason for them to schedule that team.
the
Well-
best option for Cincinnati would be to schedule a different ranked team
Yes,
or to
exactly.
schedule a Pac-12 or a Big Ten team that's off or had a
They
game
don't
canceled.
really have that option though with the scheduling issues.
They really
ACC
don't.
and SEC have basically eliminated that option.
Yeah.
And you're looking at who's good to play. Oregon and all those Pac-12 teams have full schedules unless COVID cancellations. They don't have bye weeks. Big 12's getting towards the end of their run. Those teams have full schedules. There's nobody to play except if they play each other. And I think Cincinnati's sitting back here. I'm not sure that it's a better option to not play BYU because if they sit back, you have to consider your options and say, do we have a better chance of getting in the playoffs if we sit back, don't add anybody to our schedule, or if we take that risk, play BYU, and is the risk of losing to BYU worth it? I think you have to say yes because I think there's no shot of them getting in the playoffs right now unless they play BYU or we see chaos ensue where Notre Dame loses to North Carolina and then loses to Clemson and that puts them out of the picture, something along those lines. But even then, I'm not sure Texas A&M goes behind Cincinnati. I think Texas A&M might be a candidate to get in the playoffs ahead of Cincinnati right now.
And I think
Right,
also
and Texas A&M talking about their chances to get in. They're currently ranked 5, but I think for sure Florida has a better chance of getting into the playoff than they do because they control their own destiny. If they beat Alabama in the SEC championship, they're in. But going to Texas A&M, they need a few things to happen for them to get into the playoff, which is a possibility. They need Alabama to win out, which gives Florida 2 losses and puts them totally out of the picture. And then they would probably need Notre Dame to beat Clemson twice to open up that kind of 4th spot. If Notre Dame beats Clemson twice, Clemson's out with 2 losses. and that fourth spot is open. And right now, Texas A&M is sitting at the 5 spot. So technically, they should have rights to that, considering they went out, and we could see Texas A&M make this playoff with what seems like an early loss to Alabama early in the season might have put them totally out. But now
If
it's weird; they have a chance.
if Notre Dame beats Clemson, if Notre Dame wins out and beats Clemson again, I think then there's chaos because who's getting number 4, Texas A&M or Cincinnati? And I'm those are the only two options in my opinion.
I think
Well, that's the other thing is if Florida beats Alabama, then that spot's locked up again, right?
I really do feel like the
So
best chance for Cincinnati, though, is if the playoff committee all comes together and then make the most stunning decision ever and just shock the entire world and decide because of COVID they can't decide enough on the teams and they extend just for 1 year the playoff to 6.
that's not
Yeah,
happening.
not gonna
the
happen.
nuclear
Let's
option.
cut
That's what
that
I'm
off
saying.
right there.
The absolute nuclear option. My point is, I don't see a
Well, no.
non-Power 5 team making the playoffs. I don't think until the playoffs are expanded that a non-Power 5 team will ever make the playoffs because they
Well,
just
I
don't
think
have enough
here's-
on their schedule, and the committee will never
Here's
take them
Cincinnati's
seriously.
road to the well. That's why I'm saying schedule BYU, and you disagree with that. But here's Cincinnati's road to the playoff: is Alabama beats Florida, that knocks Florida out. Notre Dame beats Clemson, that knocks Clemson out. You get a one-win, one-loss, an undefeated Big Ten champion. That puts you at 3 spots, and I'm pretty sure as of right now, I'm pretty much locked in that 3 spots. One's going to the champion of ACC, SEC, and Big Ten. So it all comes down to that 4th spot. You basically need Clemson with 2 losses, Florida with 2 losses, and then it comes down to a 1-loss Texas A&M, a 1-loss Big Ten championship loser, I guess, and then Power 5. And how do they make themselves the best case scenario for that spot? I think it's scheduling BYU.
Well, what's also interesting we haven't considered, what happens if Ohio State loses a game in this season? What happens if they loses one game? Because we saw the disrespect the committee gave to Ohio State. We see how they think about Ohio State based on the rankings in the first week, putting them at 4 undefeated under Clemson, who's taken a loss to Notre Dame after that really close game versus Indiana where they showed a lot of weakness. So what happens if Ohio State loses to Northwestern in the Big Ten championship?
Then Northwestern would go in.
That opens up also a realm of possibility. Like, are they left out?
I think Northwestern would just go in their place then. I don't think it really
Yeah.
switches up too much except for the teams
Well,
exchange.
Well, yes.
I think the only thing that would
I
change
think
is if one of the
Northwestern
teams
goes
loses a
in.
regular season game.
I think. Well, no, I doubt that happens. They all have terrible opponents. I mean, unless
Yeah.
Michigan shocks the world, that I don't think that's happening. They all have bad opponents to finish the year there. But if
Fighting Illini.
Northwestern beats Ohio State, then I think. Well, Ohio State's only chance to get in the playoff is, as we said, where that 4th spot's open with an undefeated Notre Dame and undefeated Alabama, Clemson and Florida out of the picture. Then I think Ohio State maybe sneaks into the conference just on a name basis, where they are in the conversation with Power 5 and with Texas A&M. I think if it's the other way around, name basis, Northwestern's out of the picture. It's just an eye test, and Ohio State's been there before, so they're in the conversation. Northwestern wouldn't be. I don't think that's exactly fair, but I think that's what will happen. And then I think everybody's basically making their best case, and I think Texas A&M sits pretty nicely right there with a win over Florida. I know they got blown out, but I think it sits pretty nicely right there. All right, so that's definitely an interesting scenario there. Let's now talk about basically our dark horse team to make the playoff here. I think we're obviously going to say outside of the top 4 right now, who do you like to make the playoff? So top 4 right now is Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State. So outside of those 4 teams, let's go through and say, who do you like most to make the playoff?
For me, I like the Florida Gators the most to make the playoff because they control their own destiny. Behind that, I would say Texas A&M because they have the best chance out of the teams that don't control their own destiny as they're ranked number 5. But I think Florida, it really all comes down to the game in the SEC Championship versus Alabama. I'm assuming they're going to take care of business up until then. But when it comes down to that game, I think they match up tremendously well against Alabama. This is like the prototype team that can beat Alabama. Ole Miss showed that to beat Alabama, you have to be able to keep up with them in scoring wise. Defense might not be the biggest priority in a game versus the Crimson Tide, but if you can keep up with their scoring, which Florida has definitely shown they can, and they have so many weapons, they know how to spread the ball around. Their game plans are ridiculous. They pretty much know how to get it done on offense better than almost anyone in the country. I think Alabama, they match up extremely well, and they have a chance to beat Alabama in that game.
Yeah, I think, like you said, Florida they control their own destiny. They beat Alabama, and they went out. They're in. So I like them, but I think my dark horse is probably gonna be Northwestern because they're still pretty far down there. I think they're at 9 or 8, maybe. I don't know. And if they beat Ohio State and they went out, they're in too. So it's like Ohio State does not have the Big Ten completely under control like they usually do. I think that Northwestern has a very legitimate chance at making it.
No, that's mine as well, Feeney, is Northwestern. Because I think you take a look and I think Northwestern and Florida certainly outside the top four right now basically control their own destiny. They have the best chances, is what I see. But you look at Northwestern's upcoming schedule, tomorrow against Michigan State, then Minnesota, then Illinois. Some just riveting football games right there where they should just absolutely dominate. I see him pretty easily into that Big Ten championship undefeated. And then it comes down to basically who do I think has a better chance of winning? Florida over Alabama and Northwestern over Ohio State. And I like Northwestern as a better chance there. Northwestern looked very good against Wisconsin. And Ohio State looked pretty bad against Indiana. Just sloppy play. And defensively, they looked pretty poor.
Yeah, for me, I really like Florida because I think when you look at it, they're built very similar to how LSU was built last year during their championship run. And I think they're a great team. But I think the team that is most likely to be able to get into the playoffs is Northwestern. When you look at how Ohio State played versus Indiana, it was their first actual game and their only actual game of the regular season, and they played horrible. Their defense was extremely vulnerable. They were destroyed in the passing game. They did great in the run defense, which was what our main question coming in, but other than that, they did nothing on defense. And when you look at them on offense, Justin Fields had a horrible game. They were able to run the ball effectively, which was our main question. The main questions were their strengths, and their main strengths were their questions. And we don't know enough about this Ohio State team to really feel confident about them. But I feel like we really know this Northwestern team and what they want to do. They could pass the ball well to a lot of threats on the outside. They might not run the ball the best, but they can move the ball effectively in the run game when they need to. And they have an incredible defense that can shut down any offense. And I think that is what's going to be what separates them from Ohio State.
Well, and I think in that game again it comes down to Northwestern corners and DBs mainly how they can shut down an explosive Ohio State offense, and basically how much the refs let them play. Refs let it get pretty physical against Wisconsin, and see they gave up 7 points. I talked about that last week, and we'll see how physical they're allowed to get against Ohio State. But I think that defense, that's the key factor, is how well they can shut down the Ohio State offense. We'll talk more about that one when it comes along. But I think looking at Florida again, they really look similar to Ole Miss and a team that gave Alabama struggles, Connell. And I think that should be a pretty scary sight for that Alabama defense is the Florida offense.
Right. No, I definitely agree with you there, and that's why I said Florida matches up great with Alabama. The biggest struggle for Alabama this year has been the secondary, and this is a Florida team that can torch that secondary. I think they've been getting better game after game since Ole Miss. Since we saw them versus Ole Miss, I think they've definitely gotten better. But in that game, the concern was the run defense. So I don't know. This Bama Florida SEC championship is going to be a lot closer than people think, and people are not giving Florida enough credit here. But also going back to Northwestern, this team was 3-9 last year and 1-8 in the Big Ten. They have a chance to compete for a championship and possibly a playoff berth. So I think that's pretty incredible.
I think the scariest part for Alabama fans isn't even Florida's offense. It's Florida's defense. I'll take Florida's defense over Ole Miss is any day. That they're not that great, but at the end of the day, it's not about who's. We talked about this in podcasts before. It's not about whose defense is the best. It's about whose defense is good enough to slow it down. College football has changed. College football is offense oriented. It's not about defense anymore. It's about if your defense can slow down the other team's offense enough to the offense being to for your offense to outscore.
It's
Well, unless you're Northwestern, but
Yeah.
it's really
I
sad.
agree with you, and I think Ole Miss, all they had to do was get 1 or 2 stops in the second half, and they win that football game, and they obviously weren't able to do it.
Yeah,
Can Florida? We don't know.
and with Florida, it's also sacks and turnovers, and that is something that Florida, although they've struggled on defense, they have been able to get sacks and turnovers. And I think being able to steal a possession versus Alabama when you have the offense Florida has can definitely change the course of the entire game.
Certainly all to play for in the SEC and the ACC and the Big Ten. Power 5, we'll see where they stand, but plenty to play for in college football. A ton to play for in high school football. Glad to have the playoffs back here in the state of Georgia. Always an exciting time. It gets started this weekend. Marist Central out of Carrollton, Georgia. Tomorrow, 5:30, NFHS Network. Make sure to tune in. Should be a good one, and we'll see if the War Eagles can get their run started in the playoffs, see how far they can go this year. Certainly one of the favorites to take home the title. Should be fun to cover, but that'll do it this week on the MBC Sports Podcast. We'll be back next week on Thursday, but on behalf of all of us at MBC, we wish you a happy Thanksgiving. We hope you had a safe and fun holiday. We'll see you tomorrow afternoon for Marist vs. Central. In the meantime, go War Eagles.